Hey YouTube, it's Tom. Thanks for joining me again. Today we're going to learn all about textures. This video is actually made for the Arizona Professional Photographers Association for their Photo Challenge Week in using texture. So today we are going to learn about textures. It's a great way to enhance an image. It will add a whole new level of visual excitement to your images. It's great for fine art images, portrait, landscapes, weddings, boudoirs, just about any image that you want to use. Textures can also color grade your image. So if we look quickly at the screen here, we have a sunflower before. I added a texture, but look how it also enhanced the color. That's one of the great things. You can add textures to add a weathered look, like the snow in the background there, or something really contemporary. This is just using texture that ON1 provides. So again, textures are a great way to do it. And we're going to add textures in Photoshop, ON1 Photo Raw, and Luminar 4. We're also going to go over two big mistakes that I've made in the past and how to avoid them. As a bonus, I am going to share a discount code for Jessica Drossen's site. I emailed her asking for permission to use a texture in this video demonstration, and she wrote back and said, of course, but she was also kind enough to give a discount code. She has some amazing products for photographers. If we go to the textures, the one that I'm going to be using today are from her Worthing Heights collection. But if you look through, she just has amazing content for photographers, and they're all reasonably priced. So Jessica has some amazing products for photographers, but if you don't want to purchase textures, I'm also going to show you how you can create your own textures. And in this AZPPA photo challenge, you actually do have to create your own texture and use it in an image. So we'll be going over that as well. I'm going to open up Photoshop and we'll dive right in. For this first image, we are using Photoshop. Before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what makes a great image for textures. And that's going to be the tonal range. Textures are going to work best on medium tones. So we'll see them great here. You won't see them quite so much in highlights usually. And in the dark tones, you probably won't see them very much. If you were shooting something in the studio, if you use Savage, like their fashion gray paper, that would give you great shots to work with when choosing an environmental portraits. Again, something with lots of medium tones are going to work perfectly. So with this shot of Katie, this is from our On the Road series at the Arizona Professional Photographers Association, where I was an instructor for this session, and I had the privilege of working with Katie. And for this, we were in Jerome, Arizona, in a junkyard. Here is a rustic old truck, but again, it is kind of flat, not a lot of texture to it. And when I envisioned this image, I knew I wanted to bring out a lot of tones in this, a lot of texture. So let's go to Jessica's textures. And with this, again, we're using her Worthing Heights textures, and I selected two here. You can add multiple textures to the same image. So let's open these up. And all you need to do is click on the texture you want to use and use your V tool, move tool. I'm sorry, the V is the shortcut for the move tool, and click on it and drag it on. I'm holding down the shift key so it goes to the center of the image. I'm now doing Control T, or on a Mac, Command T, and this will allow you to bring your texture into the image if you'd like. Okay, perfect. Then hit Enter. Okay, once we have the texture positioned, we want to adjust the blending mode. One of the most common ones are soft light, overlay, screen, or multiply. And the way that you go to that is in your layers palette and select which ones you'd like to use. For this one, I think we're going to start out with soft light. And just look at that. That's part of what I was talking about with color grading. Not only does it add the texture, if we look in here, we went from here to all that gorgeous texture. It also does color grading as well. If we look, I mentioned about how it adds contrast and a warmer color to Katie. So that all looks amazing, but we also have the texture on Katie, and most people don't appreciate that. So let's go ahead and fix that as well. I mentioned mistakes that I used to do, um, two big mistakes. One of them was to fix this was simply to add a mask and use the brush tool, set it to black by using the X key, and just removing it off. So by doing that, erasing it off of Katie, I just took off all that contrast and beautiful warm tones as well. So that's mistake number one. That's not the best way to do this if you like the color grading approach. So we're going back up here. And what we're going to do first is convert this to a smart object. Now, once it's a smart object, we can blur the texture off of Katie, but keep the color. So we're going up to Filter, Gaussian Blur, Under Blur, Gaussian Blur. And what we want to do is to pick, there's our texture, and we're just blurring it out. So pick a value where you start seeing everything go out. So if it's too low, you're still going to have texture. If you do super wide, it's not going to make a big difference, but it's going to kind of flatten out a lot of the color. So anything where you don't see the texture, it doesn't have to be that precise. And what that does is it removed all the texture. So what we need to do is to go to our smart filter, and we're going to invert it by going to Control I. And now we have it back. And this is the mask. So if we click on that and use our brush tool, and this time we're going to paint with white. So I'm hitting the X key to switch. And now if we go over, we're taking the texture out, but we're leaving that rich, warm color. Perfect. So let's say you don't have enough texture on the image to your liking. Again, you can add multiple textures to an image. I'm going to just go here, use the Move tool, which is V. Click on it, drag it over, hold down the Shift key so it goes onto the center. Hit Control or Command T for transform. Get it close. And hit Enter. Same thing, you can pick whatever blend mode you like. We're going to add it here. And if we look on it, I like what that did with the additional texture and also the coloring on Katie. I think that skin tone is much better. So we're going to do the same step that we just did a moment ago. We're going to create a smart object. Once we have a smart object, now we can go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. We're going to do the same thing to take the texture off of Katie's skin. Again, just make sure you have a value that's blurring out all those tones. Hit OK. It applies it to everything. So we just need to pick the effects mask and do Control I to invert it. And now we can paint with a brush. So B for brush, Make sure white is selected and just come on over. So that's all it takes. So we went from here, which is still a nice shot, but this is what I envisioned when I took the image. Next, we're going to do ON1 Photo Raw. We are back in ON1 Photo Raw 2020, and here this is just a browser window, and we can see the before image and the finished image. And remember just how easy it was to keep the color but remove the texture off of Katie. On one, it's a little bit more challenging to do this. I'm going to be sharing a technique that I've never seen on YouTube before. It's something that I've come up with. We're going to take this image here. We're going to go into the effects panel of On1. So if we go to edit, we'll go to effects. And On1 has a whole bunch of built-in textures. So if we go to add filter, add texture, you'll see there are just a ton of different textures that can be applied to the image, including the weather one, where we had Skittles the parrot in a snowstorm. That's what we used there. Some bokeh for one of the dance shots. I believe that it was in the photographic category. You can upload your own templates as well. But for this, I am just going to go to one that I like. Hang on a moment. And if you just hit on the more, you can kind of see all the different ones. And I love this rice paper dark. Okay, so again, looks great, but with On1, if we go to mask, all we can do is mask off or paint in. So we could either paint in where we want the texture, or in this case, I'm going to paint out. I'm going to take my opacity all the way up. The nice thing about with textures, you don't have to be precise, but if I do this, this is going back to that same mistake number one, where now look at the color, right? We have warmth all around, and now her skin doesn't look great with the overall scene. One of the easy fix for something like this is just desaturating all of the texture. So now you still have the texture there, but it hasn't changed tonal wise. So that's one way to work around it. But what if you do like that rich color? So we're going to go back. We're going to double click on the word saturation to bring it back. And we've masked it off of our model here. This is what I figured out as a workaround. What we can do is first I'm going to just copy this mask. Next, we're going to add another filter. We're going back to textures. We're going to add that same texture. This time though, in our settings, we are going to, under blending options, just use the color of that. Okay, now if we go up here and we paste in our mask, that is applying it to everywhere where we don't want it. So what we're going to do is invert the mask. Now we have it where the color's on and the texture is on, so it all blends much better. And if it's too strong for you, you can use your opacity to kind of bring down the skin tone. So it still has some of that warmth from the texture, but not quite as strong. So I would be very happy with this image right here. And we'll just hit done to apply it. Okay, now we're back to our browser. Next, we're going to learn how to use your own texture. So Jessica has some amazing textures, but what if you don't want to purchase them? Or for the AZPPA photo challenge, you actually have to create your own texture. So you can't just rely on ones that come within a program like ON1 or Luminar 4. You have to create one. So what did I do? Here is a shot of my living room, and we have a tile floor. So I just took a shot of one of the tiles, and we're going to use that as a texture. And we're going to use that on this image here. With this way of using it, the way that you have the most control over the texture is if we open it up as layers. And the reason for this, if we look at this shot of Skittles here, it's a very shallow depth of field. We can see it just by the perch that she's on. So the first time I tried adding a texture to the background, the texture was sharp and it didn't fit in because you had a sharp bird, shallow depth of field, and then a sharp background. It just didn't fit. So let's show you how I overcame that by first opening Skittles up in layers. Once we have that open, we can add another layer. And all we're going to do is select this texture. And with this, you can quickly transform and make it fit to your image. And let's then go to the blending mode for this. And we'll select, let's do soft light for now. So this is where I was talking about we have the shallow depth of field, we have a sharp bird, and a sharp background. So the two do not match. So in ON1, each layer can have its own effects. So we're going to add a blur layer. And notice how that blurred out the texture. And we'll bring it back a little bit and get it to a point we're kind of happy with. So now this texture is over everything. It's not just the green background, it's actually on Skittles as well and on the perch. And you get to decide where you want it. So we can mask off part of that. And we'll paint out. And again, you don't have to be precise, but notice how even that texture, since it was kind of a warm tone tile floor, it kind of played around with some of the colors on Skittles. So this is just kind of bringing it back. Again, it doesn't have to be precise with this. I'm just using a mouse right now. Normally I use my Wacom tablet, but I just wanted to show you you don't need any special things to use textures. Okay, so I'm real happy with how that looks. Last thing I would do is just kind of play around with some of the blending modes. So we can kind of come back here, go to our blending options, and we're on soft light, but let's kind of look around and ooh, that's kind of cool right there. That kind of really sets Skittles off. That would be perfect when we do that. We kind of notice a little bit of a brightness up here because I didn't mask so precise. So we could always come back, select paint in, and bring that down just a touch if we'd like. And then once you're happy with how you have it, we'll just hit done. And now we learned two different ways to add textures using ON1 Photo Raw. So next we're going to work on our final image in Luminar 4. It's a photograph of Chloe, and let's do that. We are back with our final image of Chloe, and this time we are using Luminar 4. Luminar 4 allows you to easily use your textures by going to the Creative panel, clicking on that, using Texture Overlay, and then you can click on Load Textures. We're back at Jessica Drawson's Wonderful textures. We're using the Worthing Heights. And for this image, let's go ahead and use Haworth. So it's going to load up the texture. Okay, so now that the uh, texture has been loaded, we can select our blending mode. The nice thing is you can see them instantly applied, kind of like this one. But again, we're going to have that same issue where the texture is going over Chloe. And this is where Luminar 4 is a little frustrating because all we can do is remove it. We don't have the ability to add back the color. But just for my YouTube fans, I found a way that we'll be able to do that as well. So first thing we're going to do is edit, brush, and we're going to erase. And we're just going to do a rough selection over here. Opacity, I'm going to bump that up to 100. Softness at 100 as well. And we're just going to kind of paint over. Again, doesn't have to be exact for this demonstration. Again, I'm using just the mouse. Okay, so we have the texture on the image. It looks pretty nice. We can see before and after. And going back to colors with this, let's say you don't have Photoshop or you don't have ON1, and unfortunately Luminar 4 took away its blur filter. So what can we do? I found a free way for you. You can go to canva.com. It's a free site to use. You can upload an image to it, then go to adjust, and it has a blur setting. So we can kind of do that same thing we were doing in Photoshop, where we're just going to blur it and download the image. And I've already done that for us. Then with Luminar, we can go up to layers and we can add a layer. And in this case, we're doing a new image layer. And let's see, we just need to navigate. Okay, and here's that image that I downloaded from the site after applying a blur to it. And now for here, all we need to do is to change the blending mode. So we could try the soft light. Okay, so we added the color layer. Again, this doesn't have any texture, it just has the colors from Jessica's texture. First thing we need to do is transform it so we cover the entire image. Okay, once that's done, we'll hit done. Now it's applied the color to the entire image. We actually just want it on Chloe. So we would edit mask, brush. This time instead of erase, we're going to use paint in, and now it is just going to put it onto the parts that we paint in. Okay, and perfect. There's our image of Chloe. We got the color back from the texture. We have the texture in the image as well if we zoom in. And that is how you can add custom textures using Luminar 4. Hey guys, I hope that you enjoyed this presentation going over Photoshop, ON1 Photo Raw, and Luminar 4 and how to apply textures. Textures are a lot of fun. I think you're going to really enjoy using them. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to grow it. That would be most helpful. Also, I promise to provide unique content that hopefully you won't be able to find anywhere else. These techniques are mine, and I don't believe you'll be able to find them anywhere else for the ON1 and Luminar for using textures. Again, thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Be sure to comment. I'd love to hear how you use textures in your work. That would be awesome. Thanks again.